cut off, then I mean, we're going to see an absolute crisis. And yesterday there was talk of rationing in Germany and Austria. So unsurprisingly, in this situation, Olaf Scholz telephones Putin. And we have these statements from the Germans, which, as you say, very short, very uninformative readout, but basically says that the Russians agreed that the payments will be made to Gazprom Bank in euros and dollars, and that Gazprom Bank will convert them into rubles. Now, that might be true. And I would point out that if that is the case, then of course this play that Putin undertook last week, whatever else it's done, it's achieved one effect, because going into those series of meetings that we had last week, the EU Council meeting, the NATO meeting, the G7 meeting, there was lots of talk of more sanctions being unrolled, more sanctions against the entire Russian banking system, more sanctions against Russian energy. And in fact, what we got out of those meetings were no sanctions at all. It was absolutely nothing. I mean, it was sanctions on a couple of individuals, a couple of companies, sanctions which in effect repeat previous sanctions, but it's as if the whole sanctions bandwagon had suddenly ground to a stop. And it may be that Putin floating this possibility, and I've always said he was very vague in those initial statements that he made about converting the whole trade into rubles. But Putin saying that may have had the effect of actually, killing off any idea of further sanctions last week. But I have to say, I think that the Russians probably have made no commitments at all to Scholz. I suspect Scholz telephoned Putin, said to Putin, we're going to continue paying in euros and dollars, because if we don't, we are in effect cancelling our sanctions, our really big sanctions, our sanctions against your central bank, our sanctions against your financial system, your other banks which have been de-SWIFTed. We would be forced in that case, presumably, to use your interbank messaging system rather than ours, which is SWIFT. So I think Scholz was forced, in effect, to tell Putin that, because otherwise his entire sanctions policy would be ridiculous. And I suspect what happened was that Putin, in fact, gave no answer. He simply seems to have said, well, things will continue pretty much as they are. We'll continue to provide you with gas and oil on the same basis. But of course, that might not actually mean fully the same basis in terms of payment mechanisms. And why don't your officials talk to our officials? Now, that's what I suspect happened. In fact, in other words, I think that Putin is still keeping Scholz hanging out to dry. He's not really telling Scholz what he's planning to do, what the Russians are planning to do. Now, I think from a Russian point of view, it probably is more advantageous at the moment, both to keep financial flows moving into Russia and to keep relations with the German business community still functioning after a fashion. But I suspect that by the end of the summer, we will start to see the Russians purposefully moving towards ruble payments, not just for their oil and gas, but the Russian Food Producers Union has now said they want to do that for food as well. And after food, metals, the whole range of Russian exports will be paid for in rubles by more and more countries around the world.
Oh yeah, I think that's confirmed pretty much. I mean, we've got Duma members saying this. We've got the state media, all the media in Russia is saying that the ruble's payment structure is going to cut across all commodities and resources.
Absolutely.
So I think that's coming.
And the IMF has just now released a statement saying that the sanctions war is undermining the global position of the USD. Now, they caveated it because, of course, the IMF is based in Washington and they don't want to bring the wrath of the United States down upon their heads. But what they said was that though the USD would remain the most widely traded global currency, what we're going to start to see is other currency systems, payment systems, starting to be developed in parallel alongside it. Well, anybody who knows anything about world trade knows that that isn't really a viable model. Either you have one currency in which everything is traded, or you don't. And I mean, it's as simple as that. So if we're going to move away from a system where trade is conducted in the USD and in allied currencies to the USD, like the pound sterling, the yen, and the euro, if we're not going to have that, then we're going to have a completely different global financial structure with a succession of currencies, one of which is increasingly looking likely to be the ruble, trading in commodities. And of course, as trade in commodities develops, remember, everybody has to buy food. And with Russia being the major wheat producer, and Russia and Ukraine being the dominant wheat producer, and the dominant metals producer, people are going to have to hold rubles around the world if they have to buy food in rubles, if they have to buy oil in rubles, if they have to buy metals in rubles. So the ruble will steadily, over the course of this year and next, and probably over a certain period, become internationalized, part of a new global currency. And of course, where the ruble is going, the RMB will follow, probably the rupee, the Indian rupee as well.
Well, not only that, I think you're missing two other payment options. Bitcoin. Russia's been saying many positive things about payments for Bitcoin, but more importantly, gold.
Yeah, gold.
Tom Lungo had a really good piece about how Russia is working with gold payments connected to the ruble. And one interesting aspect of that, one interesting piece of information when I was reading Tom's piece was that on the 25th of March, Russia announced that it's going to be buying gold. The central bank will be buying gold from other banks, $5,000 per 5,000 rubles per gram, a fixed price. Instead of Russia selling their gold like the collective West thought they would in order to finance their economy so that they don't collapse, the central bank has now announced, we're going to be buying gold. And what they're essentially doing is they're creating a price floor for gold. And I think you're going to be looking at a basket of currencies to buy commodities, which is going to be something like ruble, RMB, rupee, gold, and maybe even Bitcoin. Who knows?
Well, what they're in effect done with that statement is that they've now created a conversion rate for gold into rubles. So countries that want to buy things in gold, want to buy things from Russia, if they don't hold rubles, they can buy it in gold and get rubles. So now, can I just say, this is not unique.
And maybe at a discount, Alexander. They may even be able to buy the commodity at a discount if they give their gold. Sorry,
absolutely,
which is interesting.
Absolutely. But this is, of course, exactly what happened in the interwar years. In fact, right up until the setting up of the Bretton Woods system. And the country that did that was the United States. It was the Federal Reserve Board. It actually, what happened was, if you wanted US goods, you bought them either in dollars, if you held dollars, or you bought them in gold. And that, of course, was one of the factors that caused gold to pile up in Fort Knox in that extraordinary way that ended up by the 1940s, 1950s, with the United States holding 20,000 tons of gold in Fort Knox, which is at that time more than half the world's gold reserves. So that's in a way a leaf out of the American book. Interesting that the Americans didn't think of that.
Yeah, and the price of the ruble right now is at 84 to the dollar. It was at 79 before the conflict started. So it's going to go to 75. That's my
Yeah.
prediction. I
Well,
could be wrong, but I mean,
I never predict these things.
This
Yeah.
destroying the ruble plan has been a complete disaster
It's
from
been a
the Biden White
disaster.
House. A complete disaster.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it hasn't worked out at all. Not certainly not in the way that Biden expected. Certainly not in the way that anybody in the United States expected. So, whatever this has done, this thing that Putin announced, as I said, was it just last week, about going over to ruble payments. Whatever it's done, it's spooked the West. I mean, it really has. I mean, it's difficult to convey the alarm it's caused across the West. It's spooked the West. It's almost certainly stopped any further idea of sanctions against Russian banks, financial systems in its tracks. It's deeply alarmed the German business community, the European business community. We see Olaf Scholz running around, calling Putin, trying to get idea from Putin about what he's going to be doing. And as I said, I suspect all that happened was Putin said, things will, don't worry, all will be well. All you need to do is talk to Gazprom and they'll sort it out for you. I mean, that was basically, I think, what he really said. So, I think he played a very long game, that kind of game with Scholz. Scholz is rushing out statements to try to reassure the business people in Germany that he's got it under control when he manifestly doesn't. And what we see instead, surging inflation across Europe, 10% almost in Spain, 10% rise in prices in Spain year on year, 7.6% in Germany year on year. In Germany, of course, it's inflation in Germany wreaks havoc on the German system. And in fact, I sent you an article just before this program showing the way in which Germany is now the entire German industrial base is now in incipient crisis, comparable to 2008. Of the European Central Bank unable to raise interest rates, obliged to keep QE going, this in the middle of an inflation crisis, because debt levels in Southern Europe are so far out of control, and a ruble which is hardening and which is gaining increasingly the trappings and the appearance of a hard currency, and which may become an even harder currency soon, globally traded and pegged to gold.
Yeah, so Peskov came out with a statement, the Kremlin spokesman, and he said that the delivery and payments for this scheme, this gas for rubles, said it's going to be a time-stretched process. That's a direct quote. It's going to be a time-stretched process, and he was saying this is not going to be like flipping a switch and March 31st, April 1st, everything switches over to rubles. So it's going to be a process. And okay, that's understandable. I can understand that. I'm sure there's a lot of technical things and operational things that they have to work through. But on the other side, I imagine there's also what you said. It's just kind of, holding them up by a thin thread. You know what I mean? It's like it's kind of like, Scholz is like hanging over the building and Putin's holding his hand, and he doesn't know whether he's going to let him slip or not.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? And to make it even more interesting, the phone call that they had, to me, indicates something about Putin's personality in a way, and I'd like you to comment on it. At the end of the day, it's whatever choice they make with regards to payment, whether they let this bank account be open and then they convert the rubles, or they just take the rubles directly. Russia benefits because they still get the demand for rubles, which is at the end of the day what they want. So they're going to get the demand for rubles. That's going to happen no matter which option they choose. What's happening then is, how much does Putin want to punish the EU and Germany in specific? Does he want to demolish their economy and say in 3 months or 6 months, I don't care, I want rubles, I don't want to see euros, I don't want to touch euros, you either give me your gold and we'll convert it, or give me rubles? Or is he going to say, you know what, I don't want to destroy Germany, I have warm feelings about Germany, I don't want to go full annihilation on the economy. I don't want, global instability to hit a peak level. And I would prefer that we keep the German economy viable for a year, 2, 3 years, and I'll let them continue with this scheme of depositing euros and USD to Gazprom Bank, and then we'll convert it. Do you see where I'm coming from? I mean, it is really, it's not a stretch to say, or maybe it is a stretch to say, but I'll say it. Germany's economy, Putin is holding Germany's economy in his hands at this very moment.
He is. I think there's something also I need to explain, and this is perhaps a point which maybe needs to be explained to our viewers, because of course, Gazprom Bank receiving payments in euros and converting them into rubles is not what was happening 2 months ago. What would happen was Gazprom Bank would receive payments in euros. It would pass those payments on to the central bank. The central bank would then obviously convert some of them into rubles, and then it would put other parts of them, a substantial part of the euro earnings, into its foreign currency reserves, which would then be held in Western banks. Exactly. So as that can't happen anymore, it's all now being converted into rubles, which of course is supporting the ruble. Now that's not going to change. That's going to continue indefinitely. Now, we're not going to continue indefinitely because in this kind of situation, I can't help but think whatever sentimental feelings Putin has about Germany, and I'm pretty sure, by the way, those sentimental feelings have taken a hell of a knock over the last few weeks, given what he's seen the Germans say about him.
But he has
had them, and he probably still lingeringly has them. But whatever sentimental feelings he has, Putin is going to be listening to his technical people, the people at Gazprom Bank, the people at the central bank, the people in Gazprom. And they're going to be saying to him, look, this system is inefficient. It's not fully efficient. Why should we convert euros into rubles at our Gazprom Bank? Surely the logical thing is for them to just pay us in rubles. They can do the technical trouble of conversion. So I can't help but think that that's where we're going. And I think that's probably not going to play out for very long. Now, unless the Germans start being a lot more rational than they've been up to now, which, they haven't been. We've discussed the sheer irrationality of a lot of what's happening, the way in which, for example, Habeck goes to Qatar, claims he's done a deal when he hasn't done. The way Ursula von der Leyen, who remember is German, says that she's done this major deal with Biden to import 15 billion cubic meters of gas, and it doesn't really amount to anything. The way they announce all these great liquefied natural gas plants, which take years to build. Unless the Germans come to their senses and start rowing back a lot of what they've done, which is going to be very difficult, though not perhaps impossible, but it would realistically have to be done by a different chancellor and a different government, which is possible. Unless that happens, I can't help but think that by autumn, at least, when gas demand is at its height, we're going to start to see the Russians starting to say, look, we've been we've been doing this conversion up to now. It's always been understood that this is a temporary thing. We're now going to move fully and entirely towards a system where you have to pay us in rubles. And you've been given the summer to start stocking up your supply of rubles. You haven't done so. You could always give us your gold reserves. Germany, by the way, has a lot of gold reserves. You could always give us some gold and convert that into rubles. You haven't been prepared to do that. Well, that's your problem. But at the end of the day, we have to have payment in rubles because it simply doesn't make any sense for us to waste our time converting your currency, which we can't use, into rubles at at Gazprom Bank and presumably at Sberbank too. So we're going to start to see, I think, the Russians starting to get tougher and tougher on this. and as we said earlier in the program, moving more and more of their exports, onto ruble payments, because it's logical for them to do it. Why wouldn't they do it? I mean, as you said,
Yeah, this is going to be,
in our previous program, what do they lose by doing it? So I can only see gain from their point of view by doing it. So why wouldn't they do it?
yeah, this is going to be like a 3 to 6 month drawn out
Absolutely, exactly,
process, and it's going to be torture for
absolutely.
Schultz. It's going to collapse his
I think it
government.
quite like
It's going to be absolute torture
yeah.
for Schultz. It's going to, but the you said they have to make a decision though, the German government. This is not a okay. You said it's going to be a difficult decision to roll back the sanctions, and it's crazy what they're doing. They're raiding the offices of Gazprom Bank in Germany. They're continuing to send weapons and arms to
I know.
Ukraine. All these crazy things. They
Yeah,
continue to do
absolutely.
these things. This is not really a hard decision for Germany. It really isn't. What do I do? Do I support a war where the side that I'm supporting is losing and will, without a doubt,
Yeah,
lose? No
yeah,
doubt about it. Also, it's a side that I'm supporting that is full of very, very radical forces, NAZI forces, which as Germany we shouldn't be supporting to begin with. Or do I save my country? I mean, this is crazy
yeah. I know.
that this is the decision that they're actually
Yeah, I
tormented
know. But
with.
of course, doing these things, changing their policy, going to Moscow, because that's what Scholz ought to be doing. He ought to be on a plane to Moscow, talking to Putin face to face, meeting with all of these people, coming up with some kind of a. That's what Angela Merkel would have done, by the way. But anyway, trouble is, doing those things would be such a titanic loss of face for these leaders, Scholz, Baerbock, Habeck. I don't think they can do it. Politically, it would put their political prospects, their survival, their potential to act as politicians in catastrophic jeopardy. I have to say that it seems to me likely they're going to find themselves in that situation in a few months anyway, probably even worse. Chances are there will be a new German government. Chances are that new German government, led perhaps by Friedrich Merz and the CDU, will call an election. Chances are that the Greens will be obliterated because they are the party which I think most Germans will blame for this disaster. And it could very well be that the Greens never come into power in Germany again. That's possible. But at the moment, for Scholz, after all he's said and done over the last few weeks and months, to just reverse course in that kind of way that you've just said, I mean, it may make complete rational sense, but I don't think he can do it. And I don't think he has the understanding. He's a very limited politician, or so he comes across to me. I don't think he can do it. And that's why we're doing all these desperate things like raiding Gazprom offices, which, to be straightforward about it, what does that even achieve? I mean, what is the point of that?
Yeah, but I mean, I understand on a political level, he's going to take a hit and the Greens are going to take a hit, but this is their country that we're talking about.
Well,
This is existential
well, I
for
know,
Germany.
yeah, I
This is
know.
their country that we're talking about. Are they ready
Well,
to sacrifice their country for their own personal hangups?
Well, possibly, but possibly if they think that they won't have to make that choice because, things might change. The Russian army might be defeated, the economy in Russia might crash, the Chinese might put pressure on Putin. Things something like that might happen. There's always that. There's always these
Is any
false
of that
hopes
happening?
that exist, and we're still only a few weeks
Is
into this.
is 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 anything like that happening?
No, nothing like that
You
is happening.
mentioned a few things. Is the Russian army losing? Is China backtracking on its support for Russia? Is the Russian economy tanking? I mean, this is a
No,
serious
no,
question. Is
none
any
of
of those hopes
no, none of those hopes.
possible?
No, none of those hopes are true. And the latest opinion poll from Sion, which is a Russian opinion pollster, puts Putin's support at the moment as 83%. It continues to grow. So there we go. So at the moment, none of those things are happening. But if you are a deluded individual, and to be straightforward about it, I mean, Angela Merkel was never deluded. Whatever else she was serpentine, she was manipulative, she was treacherous, but she always had a grasp of reality at the end of the day. This bunch, I saw that at the Munich Security Conference, are deluded. I think they're still high on the Kool-Aid of sanctions and supporting Ukraine and all those things. I don't think they've grasped yet. Well, I think they're starting to grasp the full consequences of what's happening, but it's only step by step beginning to dawn on them what a disaster they've caused for themselves. Same is true in Britain, by the way. I mean, I don't know what the situation is in France. I gather that Macron is now facing increasing criticism on the campaign trail. Le Pen is catching up on him. But in Britain, at least, the opinion poll ratings of the Conservative Party are starting to tank, and that with the economy, as people again struggle with higher prices and higher mortgage costs. Everything is rising. All these costs across Britain are rising. And now we've had statements from the Bank of England also saying that we're going to experience an unprecedented squeeze on living standards in Britain. So, they didn't think this through. They're still, as I said, on the Kool-Aid of sanctions. We have all kinds of statements about, how Putin has supposedly lost confidence in his military leaders, how his intelligence people are lying to him. The media is full of these stories. So they haven't yet, I think, accepted fully the realities, and they're clinging to hopes. But of course, the realities are closing in on them, and I think they're beginning to sense it. And in the case of Scholz himself, you see the first symptoms of panic. The raid on Gazprom Bank being an excellent case in point of this. I mean, what was the point of that at the moment?
Yeah, I think the Vatican actually did make the payment in rubles for gas, just on a side note. But final question, and I've been following what's been coming out of Boris Johnson and the Conservative Party. They're doubling down
No, I
even
know,
harder on their policy towards Russia. I mean, they're not
No,
backtracking
no.
at all. They're actually getting
I know,
crazier.
absolutely.
They are getting crazier with their
No, no.
statements. But don't these guys have advisors? Anyone? Isn't there anyone in 10 Downing Street? Isn't there anyone close to Schultz that can just knock some sense into them and say, look, don't believe what the Daily Mail is telling you. Don't believe what the Sun is telling you, what Bild is telling you. The Russians are steamrolling now, the Ukraine military in the Donbass. They're winning. The ruble is the ruble is at 84. Just look at the chart, Olaf. Look at the chart, Boris. It's not working. You guys need to get an off-ramp here. I mean, isn't there anybody?
No, I don't think so. Not in the Foreign Office or the intelligence services in London. The Foreign Office has become a deeply politicised institution over many years. I mean, I know people who have served in the Foreign Office. I mean, Craig Murray is somebody I know, but others as well. And they all tell me the same thing. It's not an institution that has retained any degree of independent thought and action. It's totally ideology now, and has been ever since Tony Blair. And the same is true of the intelligence services, though I don't think they're getting good advice. I don't think they're getting good and reliable information. And I think the same, by the way, is equally true in some of the economics departments. I don't think the Treasury, the ministries are as well staffed as they used to be. I used to think that Germany was different, but it seems it's not. So I don't think they're getting good advice. I don't think they're getting good intelligence. I don't think they have good information about what's happening in Ukraine. I think there are a few places that still do. I think the Bank of England does. I think the Federal Reserve Board, to some extent, does. I think the Pentagon does. I think that these are islands in a sea of ignorance.